The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Today on the Workbench, Jason, K6DGN, tells us all about his battery charger build project, and we wrap up on Field Day. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Workbench. I'm your host, George, KJ6VU.
And I'm Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
This episode of the Workbench is brought to you by Elecraft, makers of high-performance radios, amplifiers, and other great station accessories. Check them out at www.elecraft.com. And by Autodesk, the makers of Eagle PCB design tools, the software we use to design all of our Workbench build projects. For more info and your free copy of Eagle, go to www.autodesk.com/Eagle today.
Welcome once again to the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast, your bi-weekly deep dive into maker and building topics of interest to the radio amateur. Good evening, George.
Hey, Jeremy, how are you?
I am exhausted from Field Day.
Yeah, I bet. Well, aren't we all? That means it was a good field day, though.
It was, and we're going to be talking quite a bit about our field day after actions, because as we both got to talking about this, there actually was a lot of opportunity to talk about things to build and things to make, and my club did a lot of building and making this year.
Yeah, I saw the pictures that you posted. I especially was interested in that enormous tower Yagi thing on the trailer.
Yes. Well, let's play a game first. Let's play.
And that would be?
Let's play Who Got More Sleep over Field Day weekend.
Oh, well, I got normal sleep because I didn't camp at Field Day. How about you?
I got 3 hours between Friday and Saturday. I got 3 hours between Saturday and Sunday. And as a bonus, I only got 4 hours between Sunday and Monday when I had to be at work bright and early at 0700.
Oh my gosh! Is it why? I mean, because you're operating until the wee hours at Field Day?
Well, the first night was I left our site at midnight. We generally got a really late start setting up. I left our site at midnight. I had to come home. I still had to update the firmware on all my Elecraft gear that I took out. Had to make sure software was installed on the laptops, etc. And then so I just got into bed late. The next night, yeah, we were just up till the wee hours operating, and I think I went down around 3 o'clock and set the alarm for 6 and just kind of slept in my car.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So was it fun?
Oh Lord, yes. And we'll kind of debrief on this all here in a little bit, but no, it was an absolute blast. What about yours?
It was a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun. We have such a great crowd, and so it's great to set stuff up. It's fun to play with your radios. It's fun to talk radio all day. And even though it was kind of hot and a bit of a grind to set everything up and tear it all down in the same day, we didn't spend the night. But we did have a really good time. And with any operating event, especially Field Day, I always walk away with a whole bunch of ideas about how I would do something different and a bunch of projects in mind, like I need another set of projects to do. So, yeah, it was very good from that perspective as well. Well,
that's exactly what brings us here tonight, is basically what are some of the things that we saw at Field Days, and what is it we came up with our own personal after action reports that we can do better for next year? What are some opportunities to do some fun things to build? But before we do that, actually, I'd like to take a minute and describe what our Field Day situations were. This is kind of non-technical, non-buildy, but I'd like to describe what our overall setup was. So George, tell us about your Field Day setup.
Well, our Field Day was operating 3 alpha, which meant 4 transmitters. We had 3 HF and 1 VHF station, and the HF was primarily 20 and 40. We did a bit of operating on 15. We had a mishmash of radios, various ICOM, Elecraft, Yaesu radios. We had the best antenna was a 20-meter 3-element Yagi up at about 22 feet. And then we had various wire antennas and tuners and stuff like that. So we operated mostly sideband, although there is a bit of CW and some data as well. So that was cool. I wish I got a chance to do that. Personally, I operated the VHF station mostly because a lot of the people that were there hadn't done much HF, and so we let the newer guys operate HF where there were more contacts, and we pretty much cleared out 2 meters and 432 sideband after about a dozen contacts, so there weren't that many. But I got to tell you, Jeremy, I had one unexpected contact on 2 meters.
Who was it?
Well, it's not the station. It was the mode. We had a CW contact on 2 meters.
That's not too surprising to me.
First time I ever did that. So, which is rather clever because the normally you sit there and do every station you could hear, and sometimes the other station will say, "Hey, go to 432," or "Do you have 6?" Because a lot of times the VHF station is multi-band, and we would do that. But this one guy who's very clever said, "Hey, how about CW?" And I thought, well, yeah, we could do that. So we had a short CW queue. So that was really a kick. First time I ever did CW on 2 meters.
Well, that's cool. What radio were you using for the CW on 2 meters?
That was an IC70-100.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, what is your physical setup like? Do you guys have tents? Do you have easy ups? Do you have nothing?
This year, nobody was camping, so we take a bunch of sunshades, the Easy Up sunshades, and this year we had about 6 of them, and we set them up in a 2x3 grid. So we have a pretty big kind of pavilion under the shade because as the sun, goes across the sky, we sort of chase the sun by moving tables around underneath the shade. So we want to go for maximum shade. It was like 90 degrees plus. So I know that's not saying much for some of you listening, but for us Californians, man, that was pretty hot. So we were trying to stay under the shade the whole time. Well, what was yours like?
So this year we decided to do something completely different. And first of all, we were 3 Alpha Bravo QRP. And so we had 3 stations, and I brought out the Elecraft KX3 with the PX3 PAN adapter, and that was set up primarily as a voice station. We had an ELAD, I forget what it's called. It's like the ELAD Duo. It's a relatively new hybrid SDR QRP all-in-one radio. And that was used exclusively for CW on 80 and 40. And then we also had a Flex 1500 plugged into a Lenovo ThinkPad 420. And that was basically used as both voice and CW. But everything that we did was run off of solar and battery.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. Same here. We never use generators. It's all battery operated. So it's interesting that you did QRP. I've been wanting to try that, but there's so many competing stations on the bands. How well did that work out?
Well, surprisingly well. We netted a total of 368 or 370 contacts. And the reason I say technically is for logging, we use the N3FJP software. We had one laptop set up as the server plugged into a classic WRT 54G wireless router. And at one point during operation, one of the voice stations lost connectivity to the server. So we lost what we estimated to be about 20 queues. And of course, when we diagnosed it, we figured out what the problem was. And that's that somebody had completely surrounded the router in bottles of water, like gallon jugs of water. And of course, as you know, water absorbs 2.4 rather well.
Well, now with FJP software, it'll log it locally, but doesn't it synchronize with the server when it comes back online?
It's supposed to, yeah. That's what it's supposed to do, but we never found those missing contacts. So we basically have I own one of those the Easy Up sunshade type things, which we actually did not deploy this year. So we set up in our Vice President Ben's parents' backyard. They were very kind to pull their cars out of the garage this year. So we had the garage kind of set up as a lounge area, and that's where the food and stuff was. And then we have a 10-foot by 20-foot tent. That's kind of like, I think it's sold as like a portable garage. It has a roof. It's all aluminum tubing, and then it has a roof material that's made out of like tarp. This year we purchased a screen kit for it because last year the bugs were so bad. But to be perfectly honest with you, you literally could not have asked for better field day weather. We had completely sunny both days. The highs were only in the mid upper 70s. So I think it was 77 on Saturday and 76 on Sunday. You had a very nice breeze going through. If you stood out in the sun and weren't moving around, the sun was pretty warm, but the overall air temperature, it was just exquisite.
Oh, nice. We would have loved to have that kind of weather.
Yeah. So the other thing was, we had a fourth radio set up, but it never really came into its own. We had an FT 857 out there that at one point it was like, well, that'll be our VHF UHF station. And then at another point we said, well, that'll be our GOTA station. And then it really ended up being neither. Another thing that was interesting this year is we actually, our vice president, Ben, had put out several, like those election, I think like Coroplast or the corrugated plastics yard signs. Mm-hmm. So he set several out in the yard just in front of his parents' house. And we actually had, if I remember correctly, about 5 or 6 civilians stop by to see what we were up to.
Were they hams or just people that saw the sign?
We had a couple of hams stop by that lived locally, but then we did have at least 2 people come by who were not hams who could see our antenna from the road and wondered what we were up to.
Did you say you were talking to Mars?
Yes.
Or
because that's what I always say to the public. Either that or I quickly pick up a microphone and say, Moose, this is squirrel,
or everybody grab their tinfoil hat.
So, but actually it was really cool to have folks stop by. It was neat that there was one guy who's been a ham for a long time, and his wife has never really shown interest, and she made her first ever HF contact, which was pretty cool. Again, overall, our club did a fantastic job. We smoked pork shoulders for all day Saturday, and everybody brought sides. We had a really awesome dinner. It just really was this is one of the best field days I've ever had.
Well, it sounds like this is a great group. And I remember you talked about the group coming together in the last year or two. So it seems like they've sort of formed a great organization in not much time. So how many people were there that were operating?
I don't know, like 7 or 8. I think only one of the members wasn't there because he and his wife were out of town that weekend, and most folks had their spouses and their kids with them. My wife and my kids were actually at a wedding at my in-laws' family, so they weren't there unfortunately this year because all the kids really like playing with each other. But I mean, there was rarely a time when all 3 radios weren't fully, utilized. And again, nearly 350 recorded contacts is just insane. Considering last year we ran 3 alpha 100 watts, and I think we were lucky to get just under 200.
Well, you did better than we did. We were running on the average about 25 to 50 watts, and I think we kind of had a problem with logging that we're still trying to figure out and recover all the logs from, but that's another story. I would guess we probably hit 150 to 200 contacts for all day Saturday. So you did better than we did.
Well, and
we were running more power.
Well, I honestly I know we worked California at one point. I never personally heard them on the bands. So I mostly worked off my radio. I did 15 at the start of the contest. I kind of regret not going back on Sunday because I heard 15 was actually open pretty nicely on Sunday. But I'll tell you what, it was just I primarily manned the KX3 with the PX3 pan adapter, and that was just a joy. It was really just a joy to spin the dial to where I saw a thing. You start using the filtering to really listen to quiet signals that I hadn't worked. I was really surprised that I wasn't busting pileups, but I'd say 90% of the time, if I could hear them, I could work them. Even some of the super weak stations.
If you've never had a radio with a pan adapter on it, you don't know what you're missing. I'm very spoiled by that, and it's really kind of gone from a luxury to almost a must-have feature. I mean, I don't really mind not having it until you use it and you go, wow, this is really useful.
Yeah. And for those of you who
Yeah.
don't know what a pan adapter is, you can also, they're often called spectrum scopes, but it's basically the KX3 is a software-defined radio, and the IQ raw data is output, and you get about 200 kilohertz of bandwidth out of the radio. And you could take that into a sound card, into a Windows or Linux computer, and run it through traditional software packages. But Elecraft offers a box that's about a 4, maybe 5-inch screen that sits right next to the KX3 and gives you that pan adapter, that spectrum, that waterfall view. And it is really helpful. Maybe not as helpful in really busy bands on field day, like 20 and 40. But what was helpful was for 10, which I think I got one 10-meter contact. But for 10 and 15, where the bands weren't super crowded, it's much faster to just spin the dial and look for, activity in the waterfall than it is to listen for when you hear that, go by as the dial, and you go back and you find out it's a birdie or, some other interference, and it wasn't actually a conversation.
And some of the radios have a touch screen on that display, so you can touch the screen or use a mouse to click on a signal and snap the radio to that frequency. So that could be super helpful. So, well, it sounds like you guys had a great time.
We did indeed. So.
Yeah. So let's come back to thoughts and plans for field day and gear in a little bit. And in the meantime, we actually have a special guest. But before we get to that, what's on your bench?
So I've been really busy with work lately. I have made no progress on the 3D printer. All of what little time I had leading up to field day was spent on field day, but there actually was a new challenge that I wanted to solve. Related to field day. And actually, as of this evening, it's really gotten hot and heavy. So previously, for a ham radio laptop, I have always owned an inexpensive, previously they were like Asus or Dell netbooks. More recently, I have a Lenovo, I think it's called an Idea something or other. But it was a really cheap, $189 on Black Friday 4 years ago. It has a Pentium and 2 gigs of RAM that I upgraded to 8. I put a solid state drive in. I ended up, as Radio Shack was going out of business, I found a 12-volt power adapter that will power lots of different laptops, and this one happens to be RF quiet, so that was good. And this is what I would traditionally run at field day, plugged into a cigarette lighter to power pole adapter. But this year I wanted something better, because on the screen on that was terrible. It was slow. It was clunky. And then all the different connections for the power adapter was just messy. So I set out to find a modern kind of Windows tablet-y type thing.
Oh, what did you find?
Well, there's a ton of things out there. The probably the most popular one that comes to mind. And first of all, from a CPU perspective, this is a ham radio thing, right? It's not something that I'm relying on to play video games on. I'm not relying on it to do hardcore programming or hardcore math or hardcore design or CAD or anything like that. I just need something with a great screen, great battery life, and powerful enough to run FL Digi or SDR Sharp for my AirSpy software-defined receiver, or the logging software. Mm-hmm. But it also needs to be convenient for field day or outside UTIS. So that means a bright screen, and that means easily chargeable with things that we would have in remote power systems without having to try to either rely on the battery to last the whole time or without having to drag out a power inverter. So this search led me to a machine that is... I feel bad bringing this up because I think they're all but discontinued at this point, although they are still well available online out there in the world. I'm fortunate enough to have a Micro Center near me and a couple of things. Number one, they have a very wide stock of laptops and ultra portables and things, but also they often have open box and refurbished deals out the yin yang. So the machine that I found is called an Asus Transformer Mini. And the model number is T102 Hotel Alpha, Tango 102 Hotel Alpha. This is a Windows tablet that is a 10-inch screen, that is 1200 by 800. And this screen is one of the brightest screens available without moving into like professional tough books. Okay. The rating on it is I think over 400 candela or nits, whatever the right unit is. Whereas the average laptop screen's like 250. It is super bright. It runs an Intel Atom X5Z8350, which is pitifully slow. It is a quad-core CPU that is really good for doing about one task at a time. But if that one task is running N3FJP logging software or running FLDigi, it's fantastic. So the machine overall is a tablet that comes with kind of a magnetic clip-on keyboard, which is a little cramped. Like I wouldn't want to write an essay on it with my big bear fingers, but or sausage fingers, as an old coworker used to refer to them as. But for typing in a call sign, a call sign, it was perfectly adequate. It feels really good. There's a trackpad on there. It has 4 gigs of RAM. The model, it comes in 2 models. One model has 4 gigs of RAM and a 64 gig eMMC drive. I got the one that has 128 gigs, which retails for about $400, which is way overpriced for what it is. I got mine open box for $250. I've seen them online for $300, which is probably okay. Wow. But I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. There's one USB port. It's a USB 3 port. There is one mini HDMI out. The display is incredibly beautiful to look at. Great viewing angles. It's IPS, even though it's only 1200 by 800. A totally usable display. But you want to hear the best part about this whole thing?
It has a built-in HF transceiver.
No.
Oh,
no.
Darn. What's the best part?
It charges via USB.
Got a question for you.
Yeah.
A lot of the tablets that do that, there's a USB jack, and you could either charge or you could use the USB as a socket for like a peripheral. Mm-hmm. Are there 2, one for charging and one for use, or is it a single jack?
There is a mini USB mini port, just like you would find, USB micro, like you would find on your cell phone, that you use a USB micro cable to go from a USB power supply, and it charges the tablet. And then there is a full-size USB 3A port.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, now I'm impressed. That's great.
Now, what's really cool about this is it's kind of, I think, a little bit of a hack on technology, because the charger that comes with it is actually a 9-volt USB charger, which, of course, would destroy anything that doesn't expect it. My guess is what they have done is they have, and this may actually be legitimate. I'm not a USB expert, especially not with the newer power distribution standards. But my guess is what happens is when you plug it in, the tablet negotiates with the charger to say, hey, tell me all the power you can give. And it says, hey, I can do 5 volts at 2 amps, or I can do 9 volts at 2 amps. And it's like, oh, well, my battery's only got 20% left, so let's go for the higher one. Because but it will also charge. It's just much slower, but it will also charge if you plug it into a standard like 2.4 amp or 2.1 amp USB 5 volt.
But that's a micro USB. It's not a USB-C jack.
Correct. It's micro USB. It charges just really like your cell phone.
Well, that it's odd because the if it does that sort of higher voltage thing, that's proprietary to Asus, because the USB 2 spec doesn't, or even 3 doesn't do that, I don't think. Well, but USB-C does.
USB-C, specifically USB-C, the power distribution stuff does, but also Qualcomm had a standard called Quick Charge. And Qualcomm basically did the same thing, that it negotiates a rate based on variable voltage from the power supply. My guess is this is, again, it's probably Asus's implementation of this idea from both Qualcomm and the USB-C PD. Mm-hmm. So I mean, for if you're looking for a throw around, because it's got a metal case, and the battery life is like 10 hours. I mean, like, seriously, this thing is a slam dunk for a knockaround ham radio terminal that's running Windows 10. Plenty of storage, plenty of memory. Again, the CPU's not the greatest. It's the lowest end in all of the Intel families, like the Atom is the lowest end. It was designed to compete against ARM system on a chips, right? Or systems on chip. But again, recharges via USB, completely readable screen outside. Metal case. And then also, I forgot to mention, it also comes with a pen that is roughly the same functionality as you would find with the Surface 4 Pro. All the different levels of pressure and the buttons and everything else. Microsoft Store online was selling the 64 gig storage version of this for $250. It is absolutely a fantastic little 2-in-1 tablet thing for ham radio. But so I have that, but that's not what's actually on my Workbench singularly.
What else you got?
Well, the thing is what I really wanted was a little bit more oomph. And what I really wanted, if I could have gotten that tablet to come with an Intel Core M processor, which is a dual core, low power version of the mobile i series, like i3, i5, etc. That was really my dream. I don't need 8 gigs, again, for what I use it for. So I've been keeping my eye out because I bought this thing. I have 15 days to return it, and that day 15 is actually on Saturday. Of course, we record this on Friday night. So I've been keeping my Micro Center. Earlier this week, they actually had a Surface 4 Pro M3, which is the lowest end one. When it came out, it sold for $900. They had an open box one for $420, which is a screaming deal. Now, granted, it doesn't come with a keyboard. So I went to go pick it up, and I thought, well, I'll compare the two. Those tablets have a 12-inch screen. That one's like ultra crazy 2000 by 3000 resolution. But I didn't like the screen as much. I didn't like the action of it with the pen and everything. Also, it uses a crazy proprietary charger that is Microsoft only. And half of the 12-volt chargers I was finding were not compatible with the M3 version of the tablet. They were only compatible with the i5 and the i7. I don't know why. So that pretty much, kicked it out of the running. But then they had another one that is called a Spectre 12 X2, which is another 2-in-1 detachable keyboard tablet. 12 inches, HD resolution on the tablet screen, almost as bright as the Asus. It's like 383 candela instead of 400 and some. Beautiful colors, and it has 2 USB-C ports. So I had originally not considered this because for the pedigree that this comes from, which is late 2015, early 2016, Hewlett-Packard had actually locked charging out from any device other than Hewlett-Packard chargers. Back in May, I found out they made a firmware modification that would actually open it up to any, I think it's PD or USB-C power distribution or PD 2.0 spec charger. So I bought it because it has the Core M3 in it, which is like 8 times more powerful than the Atom. Oh, wow, that's rain. I don't know if you can hear that. It would allow me to basically, when I'm doing stuff with like my AirSpy, full bandwidth, being able to run DSD Plus and all these other CPU intensive applications. Battery life is about 75% as good, but a bigger tablet overall. So I have ordered a 12-volt USB-C charger that does 45 watts, which is what this requires. And we're going to see how it goes. I should have that on Sunday. And the management at Micro Center, because I'm a pretty loyal customer, they were like, okay, we'll extend the return period on the Asus tablet. And go compare them, keep the one you want, bring the other one back. So that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, nice.
But it is pretty exciting to find potentially these 2 USB rechargeable things that are long battery life, bright screen, lots of connectivity options. So I've been very much excited. I haven't been this excited about a Windows device in a very long time.
Well, this is really cool because I keep on top of these ultra thin laptops reasonably well, but I've never seen either one of these. So obviously I'm not doing my homework. So this is great. And these machines are very, very reasonably priced. I was just looking them up as you mentioned them. And in fact, the Asus one, the 4 gig version I saw at the Microsoft Store is $229.
Yep. So it's come down even further.
Another $20 or so. And then so the Spectre is the HP
it's this
brand, I guess.
Yep. It's the Spectre 12 X2. And that's another thing too. The Asus came with literally no bloatware installed. I just got the Spectre home this evening and have spent the first hour uninstalling crap.
That's one of the reasons why I haven't bought an HP a consumer computer for years and years and years, is because of exactly that reason. But also, they haven't made, frankly, very compelling machines. But this looks really pretty. It's a slick looking machine.
Yeah,
by the way, I think your whole point about the compelling thing of the USB charging for portable operations, that's a super important point. And one of the reasons that we went to tablets for logging is because everybody's laptop would last 2 hours and nobody had a 12-volt DC charger except me. And it just became kind of a pain in the neck. So we went to the tablets. I think if more people use these, then I think FJP, which is a good piece of software, would be great to run on one of these machines.
I would agree. And actually, just doing a search for my Spectre, which I'll report on the results of my test. But I just saw that a refurbished model of exactly what I got for $349, which of course is only a little more than $100 more. Honestly, I want to come up with a way to justify keeping both tablets, because having something that can recharge off of any USB port in the world, there's value in that. Whereas with the USB-C, I'm going to always have to carry equipment with me and not just a cable. So it's going to be a tough decision. All right, so that's basically what's on my Workbench. George, what about you?
I have too many unbuilt kits on my Workbench, including my Whisper transmitter, my BitX, and a keyer now. So, but we'll come back to the keyer when we talk a bit more about Field Day in a bit. And so no new projects being built. So most of what I've been working on is making a list of things to think about building after Field Day. So why don't we take a quick break, and we'll come back with our guest, Jason, K6DGN, who will talk a bit about his project building a battery pack to charge his HT, and a little bit about RC aircraft. And then we'll wrap up with our Field Day project ideas at the end.
Well, and before we go away, two quick things. A reminder is go ahead and visit hfsigs.com now. Go ahead and get your order in for the BitX 40 7-watt 40-meter QSB.
QSB radio.
The QRP radio.
Well, you might be right.
We're going to be doing a couple of segments here and there over the next few months about this radio. We think it is an absolutely awesome introduction to NHF radio in the various stages, and it's a kit in the sense that you're connecting stuff to it. There's soldering involved, but it's not putting components in necessarily. But this radio is incredibly well documented, well supported. The oscillators that generate the frequencies for this run off of an Arduino controlled SI5351. Source code is available, and the community has created all kinds of hacks and mods to give this radio even more capabilities. Everything from filtering, signal filtering, bandwidth filtering, even all the way down to 3D printed designed cases for this thing. So hfsigs.com to pick up your BitX 40, $60 delivered, $70 guaranteed delivered through DHL. Good deal. Finally, I wanted to thank all 750 of you who have purchased one of the Ham Radio 360 antenna analyzer boards. Cale reported yesterday that we are officially sold out.
Not a single antenna analyzer to be had?
Not a single one left. Cale is mailing the final ones to the final destination today. And I don't know if he's going to treat it the way that some automotive manufacturers would treat the last car that rolls off an assembly line and where everybody signs it. In hindsight, we actually probably should have done that while we were all together at Dayton. But anyway, we'll do it next time. Reminder to folks, if you have not gotten one by now, that's it. This is finito for Rev 1 of this board. We are going back to the drawing board with our friend Barrett, K6BEZ, who originally designed this circuit, to come up with a Rev 2 of the board that doesn't require the use of unobtainium diodes.
That's right. It'll be using regular modern components, hopefully.
No more,
we'll have that soon.
No more George's cousin, the hairy Greek guy in the dirty streets of or the back alleys of Athens sourcing, illicit diodes.
In a brown paper bag.
Yes. You don't want to ask how we got them.
No, you don't. And with that, we'll be back in a minute. Elecraft is one of my top picks for high-performance HF radios. They make fantastic base station-style radios, amplifiers, pan adapters, and other station accessories. They're also the designers of the KX3 and KX2, the ultimate portable HF radios. If you're thinking about SOTA, portable operating, or travel, you really need to be looking at Elecraft. Elecraft has some of the best designs in the industry, compact, high-performance, feature-rich designs. You're really going to love them. And Cale just got his KX2. So be checking out the Ham Radio 360 podcast and also the Facebook page and see what he's doing with his KX2 radio. The KX2 is my personal favorite for going portable. It's ultra small, 80 through 10 meters, sideband CW and data modes, and the thing runs 10 watts on the internal batteries. You'll love it. Check it out at elecraft.com.
So, George, we're not alone tonight.
No, we have a special guest tonight. Tonight we have Jason, K6DGN. Hello, Jason.
Hello. How are you?
Very good.
Hello.
And some of you may recognize Jason, K6DGN, because Jason was recently interviewed by our friend Curtis, K5CLM, who's the host of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. And they did a really interesting show all about ham radio and RC aircraft. And it turns out that Jason was one of our guest speakers at Baycon back in January, and he didn't talk about aircraft. He was talking about a project that he built, a battery pack. So we thought we would have him on the show and talk a bit about his project and maybe a little bit on RC aircraft while we're at it. How's that sound?
That sounds good to me.
And then overall, we are going to spend some time debriefing on Field Day because as I went through Field Day, George, I don't know about you, but I realized that there is just a whole host of topics about building stuff when you really stop and look at all the components of Field Day.
There's a lot. And whenever I do Field Day, I don't know if you did this, Jeremy, but by the end of the day, I've made like a page of notes of what to do different next year, what to bring or what to build or what to leave at home and what to do better at. So there's always something.
Well, let's get started with our guest, Jason. What's on your workbench this week?
So on my workbench, and I'll try and go through this really quickly, there's actually nothing directly ham radio related. I've been doing a lot of RC aircraft related things, especially centered around regular fixed wing, everything off the shelf airplanes, and getting back into the joys of FPV or first person view flight, which requires a 5.8 gigahertz video transmitter. There's actually a bunch of different frequencies you can use, but that's the one that's the most convenient because the antenna is tiny. And of course, a ham radio license is required to use most of those. There's actually some new ones coming out that are actually Parts 95 compliant, and you don't need a ham radio license to use those. But I'm rebuilding a tricopter, so 3 blades instead of 4. And that one uses a little servo on the tail to yaw, which is sort of look left and right. And I'm putting together a little mini race quadcopter. You could call it a drone, I suppose, but I call them quadcopters. And that one I'm just in the early stages of doing a ton of research and buying parts and stuff like that for. So I've been doing a lot of soldering and a lot of redoing of a lot of things. I'm also reviving some old quadcopters that I got from a friend. One is an old TBS or Team Black Sheep Discovery, and then the upgrade model, the TBS Discovery Pro. TBS is Team Black Sheep. And then I have a hexacopter, which is 6 motors. And that one I haven't started on yet, but they all need a little bit of TLC and extra soldering and redoing some various things that were damaged or missing or something like that. So it's kind of like buying an old car that you really like, and it just hasn't had an oil change in 50,000 miles, and maybe it still runs, but it needs new belts and hoses and tires, and you got to vacuum out all the rat poop out of the interior, things like that. It's a labor of love.
So these are.
I'm going first.
All right, me first. So hey, Jason, are these RC aircraft things that you scratch build, or are these kits, or it sounds like they're not ready to fly off the shelf?
Yes and no is the answer to that. So like the recent airplane that I put together comes as what they call an ARF, or almost ready to fly. I guess that'd be ARTIF, but we like to drop the T because ARF's more fun to say. And that is a foam airplane. and it comes sort of partially assembled. So all the little push rods and things like that are already installed for you. You have to install your own servos to move said push rods. You have to connect the push rods to little clevis that live on the end of little servo horns on the control surfaces like ailerons and elevators and things like that. So, apply your own radio receiver, that sort of thing, your own batteries. With quadcopters, it's a little bit different in the way that I do it. So, the general public would look at a quadcopter and think, okay, that's a drone. That's what I understand as a drone. And that's fine. You can call it a drone. To me, a drone is something that you go down to Fry's or order online, like the DJI series, like the Phantom, the Mavic, the Inspire, the new little Spark. Those are drones. And you sort of buy those and put a battery in them and fly them. The way I like to do is I like to build things. And the way it works in the multi-rotor world, and you could say this is the case for RC in general for a lot of things, but generally speaking in the multi-rotor world, if you want to build something like this mini racing drone that's only about 210 to 204 millimeters motor to motor, sort of corner to corner if there's 4 motors, right? There's one in each corner. So I'm having a lot of trouble deciding what frame to get because that frame is what houses everything. So from there, it's like, okay, I want to get this particular frame, which means I'm going to probably want these motors. These motors work pretty well with these props. Propellers, and then I'm probably going to use this particular flight controller, which is sort of a little circuit board that plugs into your receiver, and it controls your motors basically. And so you sort of piece it all together, and then there's quite a bit of soldering needed to do, but it's all simple stuff like soldering wires together and surface mount pads and things like that. So those ones they're not even really a kit. You can get them in kit form where it's like, okay, here's a box full of stuff, solder it all together yourself. But I like the flexibility. It's like building a PC. You decide what case you want, motherboard, CPU, RAM. Building a quad's the same way, except instead of a case, you have a frame, and you just kind of put it all together yourself. And lots of research and reading and debating and fretting and trying not to spend too much money.
It sounds like you have a lot on your workbench, mostly with propellers.
Yeah, things that fly. I like to build things that fly.
I didn't get to ask my question.
Oh, go ahead, Jeremy. Do you have a question?
I did have a question. Our listeners want to remember that. So, Jason, do you have any radios left, or did you sell them all to buy quads?
I have kept all of my radios so far. I haven't sold anything yet, although I think I'm going to part with my ID51A. I think I'm going to part with that one.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm going to keep my FT2D because the reason why is because while I very much like the ID51A and I like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with D-Star in my opinion, but all my other radios are System Fusion. So I have a FTM100 in my car. I have an FT2D that's my daily carry, and I have an FT991 which I am holding on to. It was an expensive radio, and I don't want it because I know I'll eventually want an HF radio again. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to hold on to this one. So,
hey, by the way, is your 991 the original model or the A model?
It's the original, and it's been Mars Cap modified as well. But
so
I never
found
used
out
any of
that Yaesu is going to make the mod available to upgrade that thing to an A.
Ooh.
And I talked to them, in fact, just this week, and asked them what the procedure was, if it's available, et cetera. And they said yes. You send it in for a week, and they'll send it back to you with a bunch of new stuff installed to do the spectral display, waterfall, and all that stuff for about $500. So the official quote is $500, but they said the final quote would be determined by the date of your purchase. I have absolutely no idea why that's the case, but that's what the lady said at Yaesu.
My goodness. Yeah. Well, I guess mine's going to stay stock. Well, other than it's been Mars modified.
To be perfectly honest, I would probably keep it stock. I got my hands on an FT991A. So a friend of ours, David, KI6ZHD, has the 991A. So I borrowed it for a day to look at the spectral display. And it's awfully small. So if it was the size of the screen on the radio, then it would be sort of tempting, although a lot of money. But it's really tiny, and I just don't find it all that useful, frankly. If it were big, like on the 7300, it'd be great, but it's tiny. Mm-hmm. So for $500, it's a pretty modest effort to come up with a spectral display. So sorry to derail the question, Jeremy, but I was curious about that.
Oh, that was a good question. I was kind of ribbing him because I'm pretty sure in a previous episode you had said that he sold all of his aircraft to get an amateur radio and then sold all of his amateur radio to get back into aircraft. So,
well, so I got lucky. Right around the time I was looking to get back into RC, and I still kept some of my old stuff. Like some of my RC stuff's like 3, 4, 5 years old. It basically sat in a box the entire time I was doing nothing but ham radio. And out at Baylands Park in north of Sunnyvale here in the Bay Area, there's an annual swap meet. And there's a guy named Ray who kind of herds cats out there at Baylands and tries to keep all of us in check. And I think I mentioned that almost for word in the previous in the other podcast. But he helps organize this swap meet, this flea market that happens, and everybody brings out all their stuff. And so I brought some stuff to sell, mainly so I could make some money and buy some things and try and get some deals. And I got a really good deal on an old Fly Zone Sensei, which is a 59-inch high wing trainer, electric. And I got that one was $40, which is a really good deal, and needed a little bit of work, but I fixed it up. And then I also got what's the thing? It's an FMS Skytrainer 400, which looks like a Cirrus SR22 or 22SR. I can't remember. I think it's SR22, which is a adorable low wing 4-passenger little chubby plane. And I got that one for $60, and it also needed a little bit of work here and there. So I got some planes, and I'm like, okay, I want to get back into this hobby as casually and as cheaply as I can, because maybe I'll get scared and run away and go back to ham radio or something. So, and once I got back into it, I'm like, okay, I'm home, I'm back, for a while at least.
Well, you don't have to do one and forsake the other.
Yeah, well, I'm still
really blend them together.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying. I'm just bummed that I missed field day because I had a big camping trip that they normally don't land on the same weekend, but this year they did, unfortunately. So,
all right. So, Jason, you technically have been on the show before because we have played your talk from BayCon earlier this year, where you talked about basically a very simple engineering problem that is required a little bit of research, but is something that, as you pointed out many times, something that anybody can do. Why don't you tell us about the power project that you built?
Yeah, absolutely. So as some may remember, the rub here was that my daily carry radio at the time, which is an ID51A from ICOM, required 12 volts to charge. And I previously had a little USB, it had a mini USB port on it. It was this little 1.5-ish watt UV3 Baofeng radio. And the only reason I kept it is because it was tiny and I could charge with USB. So I wanted to be able to continue to do that because USB, you can carry it around. You can carry around USB power with a little battery pack or something like that, or a car charger or whatever whatever you had. USB is actually shockingly prevalent. It used to be, 12 volts is prevalent because I can run it off my cigarette lighter or something like that. But USB, everything's USB these days. So I wanted to charge my radio with USB. That was the sort of initial drive as to why I wanted to build this.
All right, and to remind people, your average USB power supply is 4.75 to 5.25 volts, correct?
Yep, that's about right. As close to 5 volts as they can get it, but they make the circuits pretty flexible.
Okay, and obviously 5 volts is not 12 volts. So kind of talk us through how you bridge that challenge.
So I started doing some reading, and I am absolutely not a double E. I'm not an electronics expert. I'm not a power expert. I fumble my way through things. I try and read and research and apply. And usually I don't catch anything on fire. So I did some reading and I learned about this little circuit called a boost converter. There's also a buck converter, which goes the other direction. And there's even a buck boost converter that can go in both directions. But so I'm like, okay, I have this boost converter. And I was just reading about what the circuit did. And what it does is it consumes amps to create volts at a very high level. So you can take a higher amperage 5-volt source and you can bump that up to a lower amperage 12-volt source. And at first I was looking at ways to build the circuit. And I was scratching my head and maybe getting a slight nosebleed looking at that possibility. And then I was like, okay, this is a circuit that's been around for like forever. So there's got to be a way. There's got to be a board out there that makes this. So I did some more digging, and as some people may recall, I found this little Yeeco, Yeeco 2577. And the really cool thing about this little board is not only was it a boost converter, but it had a USB port built right into the side of it. You could apply power to little terminals on the board too, but I love the idea of not really worrying about which pins go where, because there's data and power on USB, and it just plugs right in. And then it's got a little pot on the side, and you can adjust the voltage. And the voltage is really cool because you can bump it from 5 to 24 to even 28 volts based on adjusting the little pot on the side. So obviously, the higher the voltage you go, depending on what your load is, the more amps you're going to consume on the 5-volt side. So I did some more reading, and then I finally ordered a couple of these and plugged it all together and applied a voltmeter to it to see what its output was and what its input was, and got a thing that was 12 volts out and roughly 500 milliamps according to the data sheet on the Yeeco 2577. Now, before I could even find out if this would work or not, I had to try and figure out what the power draw of the radio itself was using the charging port on the side of the radio. It turns out it was around 250 to 300 milliamps, which makes sense because that thing charges really slowly. And much like Yaesu, ICOM would love to sell you a rapid charger. So so I thought, okay, perfect. I have a 300 milliamp load. I have a 500 milliamps available at 12 volts. So this should work. And I plugged it all in, and it worked. And that was basically that's how I figured it out.
So I have a question for you on the output voltage.
Sure.
I think the handy talkie, the DC jack on the handy talkie is that 12 volts is what they want? Because I think the batteries are like 7.5 or something like that, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the battery's basically a 2-cell. Going back to my RC knowledge here, I believe the battery's basically a 2-cell lithium polymer or lithium-ion battery.
Oh, okay.
And,
so 3.7 times 2. So
yeah, nominal, exactly.
Yeah. And so they need some headroom above that. So I guess they recommend 12 volts in to hit that.
Yeah, and I figure they like 12 volts because it's pretty easy to find. You could just plug it right into a car, presumably, although your voltage is going to be all over the place depending on whether your engine is running or not. But maybe it's just off the shelf. It's just really easy to find circuitry that can charge a lithium battery, rechargeable lithium battery from 12 volts. Who knows? So
this is kind of an interesting project for a couple of reasons. One is I'm just pulling up a picture of it here. If you went to buy all these components to build this from scratch, it would probably cost you at least as much as it cost you to buy an assembled one with a circuit board.
Oh yeah, easily.
It's that typical thing, if it's a common circuit out of China, you can't build it for less than this.
Oh yeah, because they can just what do they do? Wave solder, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just wave solder them out like crazy and crank these things out. And it's a neat little board. It's completely flat on the bottom, so you get some really nice mounting options because there's absolutely no circuitry on the bottom of the board.
And how's it worked out for you so far?
Really good. I've taken that thing with me to conventions and things like that and used it as a primary charger for like a long weekend, like 3-4 days. And I just charge it off of a cell phone charger. Like a little iPhone, Cube or one of the ones from Anchor or something like that.
So, presumably you could use this with like a little USB portable battery bank, like you mentioned.
Yep.
You said that you were getting about half an amp out of it. How much current was it drawing off the 5-volt source?
I don't remember exactly. So I have a little USB power meter. It's this little blue thing. It was like $3 at Pacificon. I actually have 2 of them. Ooh, I should plug them into each other and see what happens. Anyway, sorry, random thought. Probably nothing. But I want to say it drew about 700 milliamps, maybe 800 milliamps at the 5-volt side.
Okay. And so if you were to be running around with one of these portable USB battery banks, as it's charging, do you leave the radio running, or is that mostly when it's turned off?
I would generally only charge it with the radio turned off, which is for the ICOM, the recommended way to charge it anyway. If I remember correctly, I seem to recall something in the manual about, hey, only charge this while it's powered off or you'll get interference or something like that. So I just charge it with it powered off.
Well, speaking of interference, have you noticed any RFI from this board, which cost all of $7 on Amazon?
I haven't ever charged the radio while it was powered on, so I can't say.
So how do you have it all packaged together? Did you custom design a case? Did you find a box that was already available, like a Hammond case, or?
So, so this was a challenge for me, actually, because I had a couple options. The first build I did of this, I bought 3 of these boards. I've used 2 of them so far. The first one I built actually had a 12-volt like screen on it. It had a little power shunt, and so it went USB in and then output through this little display, which ran off 12 volts. Well, it was actually pretty flexible. You could run it off different voltages, but that's the way I ran it. It was like a little, probably 2-inch display. It was a segmented display, and it showed you like milliamps drawn, like a running total, what your load was, what the 12 volt was, that sort of thing. And then it went out from there to a little barrel jack, a 2.1 by 5.5 millimeter barrel connector, female. And then from there, I built a little pigtail that went from the 2.1 millimeter to the, I believe off the top of my head, it was a 1.4 millimeter barrel connector, and that would actually fit in the ICOM radio. And that was a pretty neat little kit, except it was kind of big. So I was looking at ways to make it really small. I have a kind of a better way to do it now, which I'll get to in a second. But previously I was like, well, I need to put this in a little project box. And so I found these teeny little project boxes, which I think I have. Yeah, here it is. It is a 40 by 20 by 11 millimeter project box. Really, really small. And on the listing for that on Amazon, it listed the interior dimensions, but it only listed the interior dimensions of the wider side of the box, because on the other side of the box there were these little clips that would clip in. And so on one side the board would fit perfectly fine, but the other side it wouldn't fit because the clips pretty much went all the way down to the bottom of the inside of this little box. So I had to Dremel out a bunch, and I ended up with this teeny little pigtail that worked. And I could even kind of peel it apart if I needed to adjust anything. But honestly, once you get this thing built and you have it designed for a particular handheld that you want to use, if you're only using it for one radio, then you really don't need to ever open it again. So what you could do, there's 2 ways to do this. You could make something actually virtually waterproof. You wouldn't obviously use it while submerged, but you could make something that could get rained on and then dried out. My original idea was to take some shrink tubing and just fit it over the thing and shrink tube it all down and make sure there's plenty of lead on either side of the shrink tubing so the wire wouldn't flex too much. Maybe squirt some hot glue in there to keep your solder points from flexing or anything like that. And then I thought, well, why not? And this would be a little tricky because you don't want to get any hot glue into your USB port on one end, but why not? There's this new type of heat shrink that's out that actually has hot glue built into the inside of it. So you slip it over whatever it is that you want to be sort of waterproofed, and you apply your heat gun, and it shrinks down over your project, and it waterproofs it. Now, the only way to do that and make it truly waterproof, though, would be to take like a little 3-inch or like a 6-inch lead for USB and have a little USB extension that comes out of one end. So that way you've got a female micro USB on one end, and then you've got a barrel connector on the other end that can plug directly into your radio. So kind of weatherize things a little bit. And the circuit doesn't get hot at all, at least at drawing the 300 milliwatts that I'm drawing to charge the ID51.
Well, that's cool.
So where did you find that heat shrink with the stuff inside?
I haven't used it yet, or I haven't actually needed to buy any yet, but I saw it on a YouTube video.
I wonder if that's something you'd get at like a Hobby King or someplace that does RC stuff.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. I can look around and see if I can find some info to give you guys.
Seems like that would be a useful thing.
Yeah.
So, one of the things you mentioned is that there's a small potentiometer on this, right, to adjust the output voltage.
Yep.
And what's the range?
The range on this board is, it goes all the way down to 5 volts, which is your input voltage, which I find kind of hilarious. And it goes all the way up to 28 volts.
So you actually could use this for more than just charging your radio if you had other things that had, I don't know, different voltage requirements.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I love about this project is if you have a Yaesu radio or a Kenwood radio and they can take different voltages. Like my FT2D, I've had a lot of trouble finding information on what its input voltage is, mainly because I can't find my wall adapter. But it's interesting because the car charger for the FT2D and the wall charger for the FT2D output different voltages. So I think that there's like a wide range of what that HT can take. So, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be HT. What if you just have a little tiny circuit? Maybe you want to do like a fox and a hound. Oh, what do they call that? Am I using the right thing? Right
Fox
term?
hunting.
Fox hunting. What if you want to go fox hunting and you've got a little 1 milliwatt transmitter and you want to just charge it up? You run it off a USB battery. Instead of worrying about, I mean, a lot of people would just use some AA's or something, but rechargeable options, things like that, flexibility, or even a solar panel.
Yeah, I was going to say
you can run it off a solar panel.
Yeah, a lot of those inexpensive flexible solar panels have USB ports on them.
Exactly.
So, out of curiosity, have you done any measurements to see, how stable is it once you put a load on it? Like as drawing more current, does the voltage go anywhere? Does it oscillate? Anything like that?
I did. Now I did this like a year ago, so I don't remember the exact numbers, but the voltage did drop just a little bit once the radio started charging. But it stayed within, I would say, tolerances. So, I set it to 12 volts almost exactly. I should have set it to like 12.05 or something like that, which I'm sure would have been fine. And I want to say I set it to like 12.01 because that was as close as I could get it. And during charging, it dropped to like 11.98 or something like that. I mean, just not really enough for the radio to care.
Gotcha.
So those switching regulators should be pretty stable at the target output. I mean, it's the whole point of it. So I would imagine that it would be pretty good. The only thing that would make it act weird is if you're trying to pull too much current and it wouldn't handle it. But obviously, in your case, it worked okay. I think I saw looking at this thing on Amazon, it says 2 amps. So I assume that is I don't know if that's 2 amps max on the output or on the input. But
yeah, I would say that's on the input because the product page that I saw, and maybe that's changed because the product, I bought these over a year ago, but the product page list recommends a max load of 500 milliamps at 5 volts.
But yeah, this seems like a really useful general purpose circuit. It's funny when I saw you, or we first talked about you presenting this at Baycon, and you said, "Well, I don't know if this is a useful project in general. What do you think?" And I thought, actually, that's a rather brilliant idea because it's so obvious, and I never thought of it. So, I love things that like someone comes up with an idea and you go, wow, that's a great idea. And like, where was I at the time?
Yeah. And that's usually me. Like, oh man, like I saw a YouTube video last night of a guy wearing one of those inflatable T-Rex costumes. And the title of the video was Jurassic Parkour. And he was doing all kinds of cool parkour. And I'm like, how has no one thought of that yet? Like, this just finally happened.
I don't even know what that is.
Parkour is a French word for free running.
I just want to point out I knew what it was, George.
Yep, see?
Well, I wasn't surprised that you would know what it was. I have no idea.
But
I live
it's
a sheltered life.
It's basically free running, so you can jump around on building tops and do all kinds of backflips and stuff like that. It's pretty cool and way more hardcore than I would ever possibly dream to be.
Was he doing that in his dinosaur costume?
Yes, exactly.
That's
Jurassic Parkour dressed up as an inflatable T-Rex. Only on the internet.
Although now I'm sure we're going to get tons of hate mail about how the Tyrannosaurus Rex wasn't a Jurassic era dinosaur. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I think he was Cretaceous, if I remember correctly. But oh well.
So now that you're back to the copter building and the aircraft building, do you have any ham radio projects you can imagine in your distant future?
I still would love to build a repeater one day. That's on my list of things I'd like to do. Actually, if I can ever get myself a antenna on the house again, or just go out and operate in a field on a random wire or something like that, I really want to try and get decent at some of these oddball, well, maybe not oddball, but some of these other digital modes like JT65, JT9. There was a brand new one that I saw on the Bayonet mailing list that somebody was talking about. What was that one called?
FSQ?
There's FSQ, but I thought there was and that one's also very interesting, but somebody else mentioned a new digital mode. David Ranch mentioned it.
Oh, I don't know. Was it JT and yet another number?
I think it was like JT10 or something like that. I wish I could remember. But I love the idea of taking like a watt or 5 watts or something like that. And even though it's not really a conversation, it's I'm here, you're there, here's my call sign, done. I love the idea of talking to the other side of the world on a watt or 3. That's pretty cool. Or doing really slow digital things like that is still really fascinating to me. You know, like RIDI and APRS, things like that.
Oh, here, I just got the email, FT8.
Yeah, that's the one. We were close.
Sounds like a Yaesu. So he says here the WSJTX team introduced a new mode called FT8 that's substantially faster than JT65 and JT9 in the GitHub repository. So I think this is for those who want to experience the bleeding edge of digital modes.
Where you can talk to the other guy that's using that same mode.
Or probably just yourself.
Yeah. Hey, you know what, though? If it's really good, it'll go all the way around and you'll get an echo. Right? That's
right. You'll hear it long path. Yeah, make sure you have 2 radios. Otherwise, it'll be a pretty boring night. By the way, at Field Day, we were running some PSK, RTTY, and some JT.
Excellent.
So, a little bit. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got from Field Day was, can we please do a training class before Field Day so we know what we're doing before we get there for things like the digital modes? So I think we need to put that together.
I think that's a great idea. I'd go.
Yeah, I think it'd be really useful to do the JTs and even PSK and RTTY because there's a lot of newish hams in the club and they've not done this before. And while it's not all that complicated, it's a whole lot easier if someone else shows you how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've sat down in front of like FL Digi and those types of programs, and I'll sit there and I'll fiddle with it for an hour, and I'm still kind of lost. So, if not very lost. And then, of course, things like JT65 and JT9 are all timing based. And while you can go and read and watch YouTube videos on how it all works, it's pretty confusing. So, for me, it was a real big eye opener when David was going over, how JT65 and JT9 worked last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also Barak, our antenna analyzer designer, good friend. He has used Whisper a bit. We used Whisper to do antenna testing. So when we were testing out the Pactena, we actually did A/B comparisons between Pactena and another commercial portable HF antenna, which will go nameless. And we did a very scientific, seriously, a scientific comparison. So we would run Whisper on antenna A, then we would switch to antenna B, then back to antenna A and back to antenna B, running different call signs, I guess, and then looking at the plots and seeing how the antennas did. So anyway, so I think a little bit of training on that would be great.
Yeah, and I seem to recall the Pactena did really well.
It did, actually. Did fine. Jeremy, have you run those modes much yourself?
So I have done Whisper a couple of times. I've actually never done JT9 or JT65. I barely have gotten PSK31 to work. And it's not that it's hard. It's just been odd that every time that I've tried to make a QSO, like I will start and the person will start to answer me and then they will just vanish. Like this has happened 3 times. But, you know, honestly, I not for lack of interest or anything, I just haven't done it.
Well, there's a little bit of adjusting your audio levels to make sure that ELC is right and all that. So it's not like super trivial, but it's not hard to do. The first time I ever tried it, this is some years ago, I took an FT817 running a whole like 3 watts on 20 meters into a vertical. And the very first contact was a guy in New York. And I could barely hear him, let alone amazed that he could hear me at all. And at that point, I thought, wow, this is really awesome. This is, I mean, really remarkably good. And I know that the WS or the JTs are even better. But I was quite surprised, actually. So I like PSK. I think PSK is great. I think the JT modes, they're interesting to see it once, but it seems like it'd be kind of boring.
Well, the way I look at it is if you're using it for what it was originally designed for, which was EME, that's pretty exciting to me, I think. And it's like, wow, I just made a contact to another part of the world and bounced my signal off the moon to a guy with a bunch of antennas in his backyard. Like, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point because otherwise to do EME, you need a gigantic antenna and some power and all that. Whereas maybe you can get away without as much stuff with that. So good point.
Yeah. That's just the way I look at it. I kind of nerd out about like kind of the extreme ends of what you can do with some of this stuff and some of the easy aspects of it too.
So you need to do 160 meter moon bounce with JT1.
With JT1 and full wave antennas.
There you go.
An array of full wave antennas on my 100-acre property that I'll have flattened.
Just for this purpose.
Yes, exactly.
That's nothing. Where's your 2,200 meter setup? A 5-element 2,200 meter beam suspended above the earth at a quarter wavelength.
But remember, he's in Silicon Valley, so you have to scope it down a little bit.
Well, you know what? Maybe I could hang it up in the air with like a bunch of quadcopters.
You know, or hey, I have a thought for field day.
Yeah.
I think you need to do a rhombic with a bunch of copters, and we could just rotate it because with those drones, all the software control is so easy to use, right? You should just be able to turn your rotator knob and have all the copters rotate in unison and point the antenna in the proper direction.
If I do that, I'm doing a TED Talk.
If you do that, that'd be awesome.
It would be amazing. Well, you know, it's funny. At one point, you might remember years ago, I was talking about the idea of taking a long wire antenna and hooking it up to, like, say, a 5-foot string, the end of it, and then a little weight or something, just to keep it away from the prop wash of the copter, and pull that thing 100 feet in the air, assuming it can lift that much wire. I'm not sure what gauge wire you'd end up with. Probably, I would say, at least 14 gauge or 18 gauge wire probably. And then, you know, put 50 watts through it or 100 watts through it and see what you can get by getting that antenna way, way, way up in the air away from the ground. But I never did it because I was afraid of what would come out of the tip of that wire. And
the voltage would be high.
It would be quite high, but would there be enough EMI to actually hurt the aircraft or cut it off from, you know, what it's trying to hear from my RC transmitter that I'm holding on the ground?
I think as soon as you finish building the new copter, we should try that.
Are you willing to take that risk?
I'm willing to take that risk with your equipment. Absolutely.
Sounds like you just became an insurance underwriter, George.
Everybody bring their helmets.
Yeah, really. It might be a one-use aircraft, but boy, it'd be fun.
You know, I might consider trying it with a sort of spare parts quadcopter that I'm going to try and put together.
So if you did that, how long could you actually run the copter and leave it, you know, up in the air?
Well, if it was a throwaway copter, I would have to pilot it manually because I'm not going to put a, you know, $100 or $200 flight controller in it. I'm going to put like a $12 flight controller in it. But and it's really going to also depend on how heavy the wire is. But you can build a quad pretty light and get 10 or 15 minutes of flight time out of it without really trying. You can try harder and use really efficient propellers and really efficient motors and get 20, 30 minutes without much payload. So I would say if you're lifting a long copper wire, which is going to be heavy, you're probably not going to get a ton of flight time out of it. Maybe a couple of minutes. It really just depends.
If you got 5 minutes, you'd at least get a few contacts.
Possibly, unless it just falls out of the sky the second you transmit.
So the wire that we use for the Pactena is 26 gauge.
Oh, it's very thin.
Yeah, it's fairly thin. I mean, you could probably go down to 30. I think once you hit 30, you're kind of in the zone where it might snap pretty easily. But the 26 gauge for, let's say, a quarter wave on 80, 66-foot wire, for instance, I don't think it'd be that heavy at 26 gauge. I think that'd be pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what that weighs. And we could even do an experiment where we could just take the string, attach to the bottom, add a weight, just to keep it away from the props if there's a breeze, and then just put the copter in the air, maybe put another little weight at the bottom just to help keep it straight, and just go straight up and see what it does.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be terribly heavy. We should give that a try, and maybe we should video it.
Yes, we definitely should. That way, if anything horrible happens,
at least we have
evidence.
we have an evidence trail.
Yeah, and then we'll have whoever's filming. They'll pan down as it falls, and then while that's happening, I'll hand the transmitter over to you, so that way when they turn around and they look at you, you're holding it. Is that okay?
If you yell, "Oh, the humanity," when this happens.
Oh, the humanity. Exactly.
All right. Well, so this has been a lot of fun, Jason. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us your project.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a blast, and I hope a lot of people out there find different uses for this. Whether you're charging an HT or running a little tiny transmitter or whatever you kind of use it for. It just requires, at the very minimum, you can get a pigtail that's got the right connector on it already, 2 solder points, and you're done. Just don't get it wet.
And we do have your PowerPoint from Baycon. So if you go to www.bay-net.org, so that's Bravo Alpha Yankee November Echo Tango, bay-net.org, and you click on the articles button, then there it is. It's the 5th topic from the top of the page, building a battery pack for an ID51 radio that I just sold by Jason K60GN.
We got to update the title for that.
Yeah, maybe you should say for an FT2.
Yeah, if anybody out there wants to buy an ID51A, by the way,
I know a guy.
Just look me up on on QRZ.
Which version?
It's the.
Is it the plus?
I got it.
Is it the anniversary?
It's the ID51A plus.
There you go.
It's not the anniversary edition.
That's the good one.
Yep, it's a good radio. It's a really good radio. I need to find the box.
The most important thing is, what color is it?
Silver. It's just the normal one, or black, whatever the normal color is. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's
see you don't use it very often.
Yeah. No, it's black. It's just the normal black.
Okay, it's the standard black one. Nice.
It's a really good condition. Yep.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for coming and spending some time with us. If folks wanted to find you online, are you active on social media anywhere?
I have a YouTube channel. That's probably the best place to go. It's mostly centered around radio-controlled things. My YouTube channel, if you do a search for, this is going to sound kind of silly, but it's heli, like the helicopter. What is that? Hotel, Echo, Lima, India, and then Dragon, heli Dragon, and then 510. If you do a search for that, you'll find my YouTube channel. And there's all kinds of random stuff in there. There's a little bit of stuff in there about ham radio, including actually a very long-winded, like hour-long build sort of vlog on how to build one of these little adapters so you can have your own little USB battery pack for your ID51 or other radio.
Cool.
Yeah, it's actually right there. It's like an hour long, and a few hams have actually responded thanking me for the video. So that was really nice to you guys out there. Appreciate that.
That's excellent. And by the way, Jason's videos of our field day sites back from 2013 and 2014 are also on the BayNet website. So if you go to BayNet bay-net.org and scroll down about 3/4 of the way. You'll see a little label that says events, Field Day 2014, 2013. And there's some really cool videos of field day sites that you shot from your copters.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they don't let me fly anymore. I'm some kind of outlaw now, so they don't let me fly at our sites, which is a bummer. But I'm glad they're there.
We'll have to do the big antenna experiment. Jason, thanks so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, you guys, thank you so much for having me. I've just had a really great time. Right. Very much.
Thank you very much. 73.
73. Good night, guys.
73. This episode of The Workbench is brought to you by Autodesk Eagle PCB Design Tools. All of our projects we're doing on The Workbench use Eagle. It's great for schematic capture and board layout. You can easily generate all of the output files necessary to manufacture a circuit board. And whether you're building one board or 100 boards for your friends, use Eagle tools because they have really excellent support. They've got a great library of available components. It's widely used amongst the maker and the professional board design tool. You'll enjoy using the tools, and there's a lot of great new features. Check it out at autodesk.com/eagle, and you could download a free copy of the PCB design tool today and get started doing your project.
So, George, did you guys build anything for Field Day?
We didn't really build anything that I could think of off the top of my head, but we assembled stuff. So we had our DD module flyaway case, which is basically the D-Star data module and a router and all that stuff all packaged up into a single case, and that sort of thing. But we really didn't build a whole lot for Field Day. How about you guys?
We built a ton of stuff for Field Day. Although, honestly, everything that we built, for the most part, were antennas or power related.
So, what did you build?
Okay, so covering antennas first. So for pretty much every antenna that was on site, with the exception of the 2 meters, were all homemade antennas, starting with, sort of. Starting with our wire antennas, we had an 80 meter, 40 meter, and 20 meter dipoles strung. And one of our members had gone out and bought this really heavy duty copper wire. I actually don't know what it is, but he selected this because at the end of the day, I mean, it's a half-wave dipole on all these bands. It's going to be spread between trees that are hundreds of feet apart, especially on 80 meters. And so this stuff is really high tensile strength, really thick. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably 16 gauge. He basically ran it together to a thing that holds each leg of the antenna. And then using PVC, he built his own current unun under each one of them. A couple of the antennas he made that you connect a coax connector to, but for instance, one of the 40 meters and one of the 80 meters were both fed with ladder line, and so he had a 4-to-1 balun built into the antenna that he made himself. And basically just made the baluns and sealed them inside of PVC with the PVC glue so that they were completely watertight. And, we had spools of coax that people had reclaimed from different places and ladder line, and then just ran it in to our central operating position. And what was really cool is these antennas, I think, cost him about $25 a piece to make. The wire, some plastic insulators, the center support, and then the PVC. But it was really cool. He had cut everything to length based on some charts he'd found online for how high we thought we would have the antenna off the ground. So obviously for the 80 meter, it was probably only about 30 or 40 feet off the ground all told, but it was spread over a huge area because, as you can imagine, an 80 meter dipole is just large. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty cool. But probably the crowning achievement of things that were made was our tower.
Yeah, I saw the picture of that. So what did you actually build?
Okay, so let's start with the commercial components. So Ben will often respond to ads of people saying, hey, there's a tower in my yard that I want down. And there was one in particular that he responded to that he basically had to pay $50 to the person for the right to take the tower down. And what he ended up getting was a Mosley 5-band, 5-element beam, HF beam. This thing weighs about 80 pounds and is, I'm trying to remember. If I had to guess, I'd say 25 feet long down the center support. And then, of course, you can imagine how large the trapped elements are. We had some sections of Roan Tower. And, of course, unfortunately, because I can't buy a tower, I don't know anything about it. So I don't know what tower or like what specific Roan model it was. But we had a base support, an extension, and then the top part that had the the thing to mount the rotator and the thrust bearing and all that, and a piece of aluminum, or I think it was aluminum. It was steel. A piece of like galvanized steel to serve as the mast on the top of the tower. So those were commercial components that were assembled. Where the building came in was the fact that I shouldn't say we. It was really Craig, our president, KD8FYT, converted an old trailer that his dad had given him into a mobile antenna support.
Oh, cool.
So this trailer, as it was on site, was probably about 5 feet worth of bed. And what he had done is he had taken some square steel tubing, and he had manufactured a tilt mount and then welded bars onto the bottom of the Roan, put hinges in, used grade 8 bolts to bolt this thing to the floor of the trailer. There were a bunch of stake points on it so the nose didn't tip up, and he built, using a piece of pipe, he built a way to have a leverage point for the crank, because this was a crank-up base. And he welded all this stuff together himself just in his garage. And, they had done a lot of work to cut this trailer into, because it used to have tall sides and, a roof on it and stuff. So they did all the work to cut that trailer down to the size that it needed to basically serve as a base. And then the sections of tower fit in the back of it. The beam does not. That came in a separate vehicle. But the section of towers fit in the back of it and get ratcheted down so they don't come out. And when you get to where you're going, you basically pull the sections out, mount the base, and bolt it to the bottom of the trailer, get everything assembled. And then we had a lot of guy ropes on the thing, obviously, because it's still pretty dangerous in a lot of ways to erect this thing. It took a crew of about, 6 people to get it up. One person operate the crank, and then other people guying it to keep it from listing, and then 2 people helping to raise, pull the mass in the direction it's going. But I think it's still pretty cool that overall, one of the crown jewel pieces of our field day was this rotating beam that we assembled out of scrap and cheaply reclaimed things, mounted to a trailer that had been hacked up for the purposes of being an antenna support. I mean, that's still awesome. That's still building.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the picture of it. This is pretty heavy duty. I mean, this is not a lightweight setup.
No, and Ben NABD had taken some right angle steel pieces and cut and welded custom stakes to serve as the guy stakes. And so there was a primary stake and then a secondary stake that was ratcheted to take some of the tension off the first one. Everything was guyed with long runs of rope, but the thing performed absolutely phenomenally. I mean, it took forever to get it up and get it down, but we were able to do so safely, and it was really cool to just see all these reclaimed pieces brought together to build, an awesome tower for field day. I don't know that we'll have the 5-element because I think Ben actually wants to get that up on his tower at home. But it's cool that we have the ability to drag a trailer somewhere for field day with what ultimately ends up being about a 35-foot tower on it.
Oh, nice. So was it 35 feet to the HF antenna or to the top of the mast?
It's 35 feet, thereabouts, 32, 35 to where the HF antenna was. The mast goes up probably about another 6 or 8 feet above that.
So for 20, that's a great elevation.
That's the right height.
Exactly.
It was almost like we planned that.
Yeah, funny how that worked. So for our Yagi, we have a 3-element Yagi, not 5, and it was at about 22 feet, which is sort of okay, but getting it up another 10 feet really would be much better.
So how did you, was it a commercial? Was it something like a Mosley Tri-Band 3-element or?
It's all commercial. It is a YP3, which is made by Super Antennas. Actually, there's two different companies started by a fellow named Vern, who sadly passed away, and he made the Yagi, and then he started a second company to make Yagis anyway. So it's his 3-element. It's a multi-band antenna, but only one band at a time. So in other words, it comes with the loading coils to make it 10, 15, or 20 meters, but we just set it up as a 20-meter monoband. And then we have a push-up mast that has cam locks, and it's about 5 or 6 feet tall with it like 4 or 5 sections, and you hoist the thing up to about 22 feet max and then guy it. So it's kind of the junior baby brother version of what you've got here, sans trailer. So it's the lighter weight, smaller version of what you have. Yeah, I could see where, you run in the QRP field day, this would probably make quite a difference.
It did. And actually, so I didn't really, on my station on the KX3, I didn't get the opportunity. And by the way, yes, the KX3 was run at 5 watts, but that was what was funny. So Sunday morning, as 20 was opening, so we're, in southwestern Ohio, the Northeast was coming in really well, and then some stations down in Florida. But these guys, you could tell, are running some power, or they are running beams. And there wasn't a ton of traffic to be heard on Sunday morning, but every single one of these stations, I would call them the first time and they'd hear me. And I would call, our call sign was November 8 Alpha. This year we got a 1x1 as a commemorative call sign for the passing of a club member from years ago. And so I would call November 8 Alpha, QRP. And they'd come back and they'd say November 8 Alpha, whatever, New Hampshire or whatever. And they'd say, "Did you say QRP?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Do you have the radio turned down to 5 watts?" I said, "Yes." And they're like, "Oh, well, you're 40 over here." And this is at like 6:30 in the morning. The band is barely open. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm running into a 5-element beam." And they're like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense."
Right. Well, just to take a step back from field day, every time there's a new ham that gets on an email reflector and says, "Okay, which radio should I buy? I want to go spend a couple grand and plug it into $3 of wire." There's always somebody who says, "Don't spend the money on the radio, but spend the money on the antenna." Now, that assumes you could put up a tower and a 5-element Yagi, in which case, yes, that would be the right advice. So I would definitely do that. The antenna really makes all the difference, more than the radio does, if you can get away with a really nice antenna like you guys had.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one of the things that was interesting, which I wasn't expecting, so one of my very good friends, K4GOR, back in Arlington, Virginia, he has an 80-foot crank-up tower, and he has a Mosley tri-band, 3-element beam on top of it. And I used to go over to his house and plug the KX3 in and run it at 10 watts and work all kinds of stations. And that was a lot of fun. One thing I wasn't quite prepared for is the more elements you have, the more focus that beam gets.
Yes.
So there were plenty of times that we were hearing strong stations off the side of the beam, and then just we didn't have the bearing indicator on the rotator controller, so we didn't bother to calibrate that. And you would try to work a station, and then you would just spend some time slightly rocking the beam back and forth. And I mean, it was it was trying to communicate with a laser in some respects. So
yeah.
I got to call CQ just a little bit for maybe about 5 or 10 minutes on Sunday morning. And only the people that were in the direct path of the beam obviously could hear us. But, so that was a lesson learned. Like a 5-element beam might be a little bit too focused. A 3-element beam would certainly, A, be easier to handle, and B, would be, a little bit wider. But it was still really cool to see how much of these things, the antennas, the trailer, how they all came together at the last minute. Now, one other thing that we had on site this year, I brought my lithium power pack. We ended up not actually using it because I have a commercial piece of equipment called a Goal Zero Yeti 1250, which has a 100 amp hour AGM battery, built-in maximum power point tracking charge controller. We ran off of 2 power film 120 watt panels. into a custom cable that I have that runs the power poles into the Yeti, and then the laptops and everything were run off there. I made some 10 gauge, like 20-foot long cables at 5 watts. You're at like no more than 2-ish amps, so everything's fine. But Craig, also the guy who put together the trailer, our president at KD8FYT, had also made a battery box controller. It wasn't meant for solar, but it has a power monitor on it for voltage, current, power, etc. It has circuits in it for charging and some power distribution. And he's got like double-aught gauge cable coming out of it with the Anderson 175 amp connectors. And he basically installed all of this in a metal ammo can as a battery controller, and then there are different ports to plug in multiple batteries. So it was cool. They built this originally so that they could run our badge printers at Dayton, since there was no power in the flea market. And one of the stations ran off that with about, I think 60 or 80 amp hours of battery. And that battery, we didn't charge it over field day at all. Like it was just fine. Yeah, we never wanted for power. That was certainly not an issue. Like the most of a dent after running all night off of the Yeti, I think we only had used about 15-20% of its capacity, running 2 complete stations off of it. One of them CW, one of them sideband.
So do you realize, of course, you're going to have to upgrade to the new Yeti lithium iron phosphate battery that's only like $2,500. Costco occasionally will have Goal Zero road shows, and that lithium, I think it's the Yeti 1450, was available earlier this year for $1,000. Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For $999.95. Of course, no solar panels. That's basically the battery box and the charger. It does not use. Oh, actually, well, I should probably finish one thought before starting another. It basically has 2 ports of pure sine wave inverter for 120 volt stuff. It has a bank of USB ports. It has a couple of 12 volt ports. It has some inputs for solar. But I'll tell you why I don't think it's a good candidate.
Oh, why is that?
So their battery configuration is not. It's a 3-cell series configuration. So in other words, the nominal voltage off their battery is only 10.8 volts.
Oh, you're kidding.
So
well,
I don't know if they have something in there that that does a boost to give you a true 12.0 volts out at the output for that. Because on the lead acid version of this, you get whatever gets put into it, right? You get whatever the battery voltage is what you're getting. So yeah, because of that, if nothing else, there's definitely going to be they do step it up, there's going to be a converter involved. Otherwise, I don't know how they claim it's a 12 volt, port, because 10.8 is quite a bit below 12 volt nominal.
Yeah.
But another thing that I learned about my Yeti, I have never, since I've had it, have I ever used the 3, 120 volt inverter ports on it before. So what was interesting is we had the laptop that was running the Flex 1500 software-defined radio was plugged into the Yeti and plugged into one of those ports. And when field day started, I got the short straw, so I started on 15. And 15 was nothing but noise. And I later would go on to realize that it was the inverter in the Yeti.
Oh.
So, yeah. I mean, I don't know if they fixed that or not. And this is just like their the 12 volt, like their very first original 12 volt lighting system. If you turn it on, you pretty much lose all of the commercial air band and 2 meters and the weather band and the MERS bands. You lose all of that for like a quarter mile, half mile around you by turning one. It's a wideband wideband VHF noise generator.
Wow! So it's a jammer.
Pretty much. I mean, I have 4 of these lights. I used to have a good relationship with one of the senior electrical engineers over there. And, he had sent me along the way after, because that's how I met him. As I complained, I was like, your light bulbs are not FCC compliant. So he had sent me a prototype where they had moved from the original design and all these through hole, and it has an Edison like A19 socket on it, or A26 or whatever it is, like the normal screw light bulb. And then it's an array of 90 through-hole white LEDs. And then obviously some switching circuitry inside to make that work. The prototype he sent me are all surface mount, and the light bulb weighs like half as much. So
is that the one that was like a 8-inch tall dome?
Yes, yeah, not quite 8 inches, probably
or 6 inches,
6 or 7.
Like
yeah,
that.
But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I picked up a couple of those, and I never had a noise problem. But that you're talking about probably the model before that.
Yes, I have the very first, three. Well, I had 4 of them were the very first generations, and I bought them when they were on clearance for like $15 a piece because they are a very good 12-volt light that are, these lights won't break. They're called the Light of Life or Light of Life. I don't think they make this model anymore. They now have these much smaller where you like twist off the diffuser and turn it upside down and the cable's all condensed. And they basically
that's what we got for field day were some of those, the new ones.
Yep.
Because I was actually about a year or 2 years ago, I was looking for a bunch of the old ones. I didn't know that you couldn't find them anywhere. And they were coming out with a new model at that time. And so I waited, and finally I got some of these new ones, which I really like a lot.
Yeah,
the units are great.
I own 2 of them because actually they actually have 2 brightnesses instead of just on and off. They can chain together. That's one of the most beneficial things about this. So like from our 10 by 20 tent, I have 4 of these lights hanging from the center of the spine, which on the Facebook group, I posted pictures of this. And, it's just really convenient only having one power lead to deal with at the end of the tent going down to your power source. But it was just really cool. Everything came together. One of my after action things is I realized I really need to actually assemble and maintain a box full of field 12-volt gear. I had to go through like 7 different lugs to pull everything together. And as I left field day, I flattened everything, but I didn't really try to organize it. And I've got every type of power pole adapter to every type of HF radio or VHF radio that you can imagine, alligator clamps to power poles, cigarette lighter, both male and female. I've got I forget the guy's call sign, but it's one of the power boost, like the ham radio power boost modules that will give you a constant 13.8 volts out regardless of the battery voltage, and it's completely RF quiet. But just a lot of these accessories that come in handy, I need to actually take a box and put an organizer in it or something, or maybe move it all into a tackle box or a tool box, so that I can just grab and it's literally 12-volt kit ready to go.
So I've got a suggestion for you.
Oh, do you?
Yes, I do. And this is one of my learnings from field day. So I always try to look at how we use stuff to make it easier. And the typical thing is you get some kind of a box like you were describing where you say, okay, here's my 12-volt stuff, and you put it all in the box. And what I usually find is you just throw a bunch of junk in the box, and when you need the thing, it's hidden down in the bottom, and it's hard to find it. And maybe you have not just 12-volt stuff, but you have cables for other maybe coax and adapters. So I went to a completely different system for field day, and I wanted to come up with something where I could easily find stuff. So there's a set of stackable plastic cases made by DeWalt. It's a line called Stack, S-T-A-K. Have you seen those? They stack and they snap together. And,
because they make. Yeah, there's a big one that's almost like a little miniature trunk, and then there's like a regular toolbox size, and then they have some like flat ones, right?
Yeah, so the ones that I am using are they're all the same outer dimension, but they're different functions. So they're about, I'd say 14, 15 inches wide, about a foot deep, and about 6.5 inches tall. And the ones that I found most useful in that space, you could either have one big drawer or 2 half-size drawers. And I got 4 of those, a couple with big drawers and a couple with the small drawers. And so I took all the stuff that I would take to field day, and I laid it all out on a table. And this was tools and spare parts and paracord, coax adapters, filters, pigtails, everything. Here's a big pile of stuff. And then because I didn't know how I was going to organize it all, and it turns out, okay, this skinny drawer, that's the tool drawer. So there's all the essential tools, all the essential hand tools that we talked about back in episode number 2 or 3. Screwdrivers and wire cutters, and the only specialized item is a power pole crimper. So that's one drawer. And another drawer is all 12-volt accessories like power pole adapters, inline voltmeter, all that sort of stuff. Another big drawer has operating accessories like headphones and audio amplifier, distribution amplifiers, and pens and tablets and stuff. Anyway, so without going through the whole inventory, that worked out great because I could sort all that stuff out. And when you want something, you just go to the drawer and open it, and there it is. You don't have to dig to the bottom of a bin to find the screw or whatever it is you're looking for. So that was great. And I had so many people coming up asking about those at Field Day because they really liked it. So the nice thing too is they stack and they snap together when they stack. So when you're at the site, you can stack 3 or 4 tall, and when you need to transport them, you could just unsnap them into smaller, a single unit or 2 together, and they're much easier to carry. They have a handle on the top that recesses into the top, so when you stack them, the handle doesn't get in the way. So those things are awesome, and I would highly recommend those things.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the website now, and it's cool. There are different size drawers. There's one that could go on top that has like a bunch of little cubby holes and multi-organizer. There's even foam inserts for the drawers. If you're the type of guy who likes to pluck out custom foam for everything that goes into place, you could do that. Now, what's interesting is Rigid, the Home Depot house brand, actually sells something similar, but I don't think they have as many options of what can stack together.
They don't have quite as many things. What I really liked, what got me going on these DeWalt things, is that the drawers have a little lock. And you put your hand up underneath the thing and pull it forward, and it unlocks it and it slides out. Well, those plastic drawers are mounted on metal drawer rails, so you get the same smooth kind of drawer action you would on a normal, like a toolbox drawer but it's plastic. It's not. I mean, the housing is plastic. So I think what we wound up with is 2 units of drawers, and then a third unit that was the top opening unit. And so 2 stacks of those things. So I think we had 6 of them in, all told. But the beauty of that, by the way, is half of that stuff would be handy just to have in the garage as it is. But half of that stuff you're not going to touch until Field Day again next year. So those units could just go off in cold storage somewhere, in the backup of the garage, so you don't have to take up the space with the stuff. So anyway, I highly recommend them, and I would suggest you think about it. I think just the idea of the drawer access made it so much easier. So someone would come up to me and say, "Hey, do we have any wire cutters?" I'd say, "Yeah, go to the tool drawer." Or someone would say, "Hey, I need some paracord to tie off an antenna line." Okay, it's in that drawer. So it was just so much easier to find the stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool.
By the way, they're not. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're not that expensive. They're about $30 a unit. And if you go to the local Home Depot, they might have 1 or 2 of the models. They don't stock all of them, but they ship them. And if you buy 2 units or more, the shipping is free. And I just ordered them online, and they showed up in a day or 2.
Well, that's nice. Yeah, because actually, as far as the Rigid one goes, don't I remember that you built something into their Pro organizer, like the flat case?
Yeah, I did. In fact, if you go to my website, to kj6vu.com, you can see some of the build projects there. So I used it. In fact, at Field Day, we had those too. So the IC7100 is mounted in one of those Rigid top loading cases, and the 35 amp hour SLA battery with all the chargers are mounted in another one, and then they cable together through power pole jumpers. And the nice thing about the Rigid cases is that they stack, and there's a metal bail that snaps them together into one unit. So they're not. I mean, for radio gear, they're nice, but for bits and pieces, I like the DeWalt's better.
No, it definitely looks better because, like I said, between the organizer you can get on top and those drawers, that just looks so nice.
It is. I'm just totally sold on that. So that was a funny thing was I think I packed and repacked these things a couple times. You know, like I got the drawers, I packed everything in it, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do it a different way, and I took it all apart and put it into bags, and then I realized I can never find anything in the bottom of the bag. So I went back to the drawers, and I'm just really happy with that.
You know, speaking of cases, one of the things that you and I had talked about, which kind of inspired us to do this show, is you had sent me an email. And, you know, I'd mentioned to you I'd used my KX3 for Field Day, which I've used before. And, you know, it is a fantastic radio. But one of the things that can be challenging about it is getting all the parts together in a nice and neat fashion, as far as the radio, the pan adapter, and then the amplifier.
Yes.
So you had sent me an email that said, hey, do you want to build something out of wood? And I demurred on that simply because I'm not really good with right angles yet. And I figure if you want a box, that's right angles are key. But this is actually, you know, this all ties back to your Radio Go box, which actually we have, we've discussed on the main 360 show before a little bit. We haven't addressed it all here because honestly, it's a couple episodes worth of content. But I think you're like me in the sense that every year you come back and you say, how could I have put my station in a Go box?
Yep, exactly. And I go through this big circular argument with myself about, okay, I'm going to build it into a Pelican case, into a top loading case. And then, no, I don't like that. I'm going to put it into a 19-inch rack mount Gator box. No, I don't like that. So I kind of go through building and rebuilding the darn thing multiple times. And I'm never satisfied. So I'm in pursuit of the perfect Go box at this point.
You know, and to me, it kind of depends on the radio. So if you have something like a 7300, because I spent time, I even bought the mounting bracket for the 7300 with the expectation that I would find a rack case to mount it in. But what's funny is you can buy, I think a 3U, like Musician's Flight rack case will fit it. And they make shallow cases, which are only like 10 inches deep, which is really nice. But unfortunately, that radio won't fit in a shallow case, and a full-size width case or depth case is just way too big.
And I have built some Go boxes with an FT 857 and some other stuff in shallow effects boxes. And they just wound up being too heavy. I was just not happy with it. So I'm thinking, you know, maybe we should just design our own. And I've got an idea for what I want, but I'm not Mr. Master Woodworker. So if you or if you're interested, or maybe we can find someone else who's a listener who really wants to build something, I'm thinking something really simple. And when I say simple, like sides, shelves, maybe a front and a back piece. And it could be as simple as, you know, sides that have like dado cuts on the inside, and you could put plywood shelving. One of the fellows that came to Field Day brought a very beautiful Go box made out of pine, and it was like 1/2-inch pine, you know, top, sides, and bottom, plus a shelf, and everything mounted in it. But that just looked too thick. I mean, it was like a lot of space taken up by the thickness of the wood. And I think you could make a much nicer design with some marine ply that's thinner, and would give you the same structural, you know, rigidness.
So what's funny about that is there is a company, and we've interviewed them on the show several times, called iPortable. Have you seen them?
Oh yeah, I've seen them. They've changed their product line. They went to roto molded plastic cases.
Yep, they used to use that, like you're talking about, the marine grade plywood that's coated in some. It's not Telex, but I mean it's some really durable, like waterproof material that was textured. I have one of the last original iPortable cases sold, and what's funny is I originally bought it to put the 7100 in. And because right now I have the 7100 and an 880, and I think it's my Kenwood 710, the version that did not have the GPS. Like I actually have one of the like Greenlight Labs GPS modules, 3M taped to it. And I bought it for the 7100 exclusively, and in theory it'll fit if you turn the body sideways. Mounting the head unit to the shelving was a little weird, and it was it's no fault of the case. It just didn't quite meet the task for which I was hoping to use it. So that thing's actually sitting in the garage. What's funny is the last time I talked to him, he's like, if you still have that and you don't want it, I still have customers calling for the original style case. Cause I really like the new ones. Like you said, they're in a roto-mounted shallow, flight case. They have, and the whole thing is still 19 inches wide, but what they've done is they've created custom panels on the left and right that give you access to there's a speaker and power poles and lights and antenna connectors and all kinds of stuff. And then they basically take a standard 19-inch rack shelf that is custom created for probably being about 13 or 14 inches wide by the time you have those side wings in there. But they make really good, it's really nice stuff for what it is. The key is, though, is can you get stuff to fit? Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not wild about the size. I think it's a little bit too wide, frankly. So for me, I've been doing a little bit of mocking up of the size I want, and I'm thinking for either the KX3 setup or a 7300 or a FT991 or whatever radios in that general size. You need like two shelves, probably something about 11, 12 inches tall, about a foot deep or maybe a little bit more, and maybe about 14, 15 inches wide on the interior dimension. That would be enough to handle the radio equipment and, the radio, a speaker, keyer, some power management stuff, but not go overboard. What I don't want to do with this is make a complete shack in a box with every possible thing you can imagine put in there. So there's some gorgeous constructed Go boxes that you can see on the web, and I would never be able to pick it up because there's so much stuff in there. It's so heavy that it's just pointless. Well, so I would want to keep it,
You're describing the Go box I have, which is a full depth.
I've seen that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a 6U case. I put a 2U drawer unit in it made out of steel.
Yeah, that way it won't fall over.
I've got like 52 radios in it and power supplies. I have a custom panel that was drilled and has different bulkhead connectors. It's got a built-in antenna switch. And it is so heavy, even though it's one of the cases that has like rollerblade wheels in the corner and like a collapsible luggage handle. Mm-hmm. It's so heavy that it never goes anywhere. It's a stay box.
That's the problem. I think if you are in a situation where you're going to the shelter for a week to support the evacuation and you just need three burly guys to carry it once, that's fine. But, even going to field day, I don't want to lug something like that. And it's gorgeous. I've seen pictures of your Go box, your videos actually. And it's great. But I want something smaller than that. So what I really want is a single station for field day and the bare minimum accessories that you want to go with it. And figure out how to do that as lightweight as possible.
So that's basically a radio and a tuner, right?
So yes, plus a few minor things. So what I would want is the radio and the tuner, unless it has the tuner built in, even better. I would like to have possibly a keyer. So I'm looking at this C42 a K1EL keyer that does CW decoding, which is kind of cool. People could watch that if they don't know CW. And it's got a keyboard input. So you can use a paddle or you can type on the keyboard. So that's kind of cool. I'd probably put on some really lightweight LED lighting so you can see the tabletop at night. Speaker, 12-volt switches and a voltmeter. I would not put a battery in there. Absolutely not. I always put the power separate, and I think you do that too. But not much else. It's pretty, pretty bare bones. Just the essential things. I would resist the temptation to put anything beyond that in there because I want it to be portable.
You know what I just realized that we could make a fortune on?
What's that?
Is license the Keurig technology and make a 4U Keurig machine.
A portable coffee maker.
Yeah, runs off 12 volts. Just uses K-cups.
I got to tell you, about 5 years ago at Field Day, there's a guy who just got his license, and he shows up at Field Day, and he brought an ice maker, and 110 volt ice maker, and he said, well, I thought it'd be handy because it seems like you guys needed ice, and so I brought an ice maker. Like, we all looked at him like, you are pretty new at this, aren't you? It was very thoughtful.
Now, going back to the Go Box, so here's what my I guess my whale, using the Moby Dick reference, my Moby Dick for Go Boxes. Mm-hmm. So if you take the KX line, you take a KX3, a PX3, which has to sit immediately to its left, and you take the KXPA 100. If you set all of those things side by side, even with the room for the cabling and everything, I don't remember exactly, but I think it's just slightly less than 19 inches. And so for a long time, I was trying to figure out, how do I build a Go Box with the front of the amp pointing out, then the radio in a vertical orientation, and then the PX3 in a vertical orientation. Yes. And, it's some solution. I think it would fit in a 3U case, a shallow case. But the challenge is, as much as I love that radio, it is not meant to be mounted to anything.
But there are you can use the Sidekicks mount.
The what?
That's the only way to do it. So the fellow that makes the Sidekicks, which are the replacement side panels and the plastic cover for the KX3,
which I have and love.
Okay, so he makes a plastic bracket that basically you snap the radio into, and then you have to affix the bracket to the case somehow.
Oh my gosh, the long-awaited KX3 and PX3 mounts are now available.
Ta-da! Yeah,
also,
exactly.
Check out the longer back leg and a beta VFO A knob for the KX2.
Yeah, that's the answer. That's the only way to make it work. And because you also want to be able to adjust the radio to exactly the right angle, so you have the right contrast on the display.
Trying to find it. Oh, here it is, $29.95. Yeah, I'm with the magic of podcasting. I'm going to describe something visual to you. So, what is this? It looks like it's made out of like Lexan, maybe similar to the cover.
Well, they went to a different material. So the original Sidekicks was made out of some. It was what do you call that?
Lexan?
Vacuum? No, well, I forget the name of the material. Maybe it's Lexan, but it was a vacuum formed, sort of thin-ish, very flexible plastic that can't be made anymore for some reason. And so he went to a polycarbonate. So I suspect that's polycarb.
So what's cool about this is, you're right. I mean, this thing flexes to have your radio snap into it. So it's effectively toolless.
Yes.
Although I do think it's hilarious. Liability notice. Sidekicks relinquishes all liability for damages or injuries caused by the use of this mount. So
don't use it around children or open flames.
So it says it has been fabricated with AMP's standard 4-bolt pattern. What is that?
I believe that is a mounting. Like if you want to mount your cell phone to the dashboard or some other thing, there's like a Visa mount for a monitor.
Yeah.
There's kind of standard screw configuration. Well, there's a like de facto standard for mobile mounts for industrial things.
I gotcha.
So there's companies that make whole ranges of like laptop mounts and phone mounts and tablet, paper tablets and stuff like that. And I think that all has the same screw mount.
Like Lido or Rams.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, still, I mean, this is cool. Like if you wanted to install it in your vehicle or on a gooseneck or something, sure. Still not sure how that helps with the Go Box per se, but at least
you need like a Lido mount half, so that would be screwed to the the shelf of the Go Box, and then this would attach to that. I haven't looked at all the what pieces would you need to actually make that work, but that's the idea.
Well, so that's my one and only desire is I wish I could put this stuff all together. As it stands now, I actually store the KX3 in a toolbox that holds the KX3, the amp, the PX3, and all of the accessories, including the sidecar, quite well. But I really would love to get it all in one unit that you just grab the case and go. Now, there's another mount that somebody sells. I think Gigaparts might actually carry these, but it's basically a stand that you put the KX3 on the bottom and holds it at an angle, and then there's like an upper stand that mounts the PX3 physically above the KX3. And that's fairly effective.
Yeah, but I don't really. But you have to deal with the amp, and I want this all in an enclosure. So I did some measurements on some of the popular radios. So I'm not sure. There's a whole other question here, by the way, which is what would be the ultimate field day radio? Is it a KX3, PX3, KXP 100, which that's a contender, or a 7300, for example, which has some pros and cons compared to those two things. I mean, it's like half the price for the 7300. Probably a little bit more power consumption, probably not quite as wide range an antenna tuner, but not bad. Certainly a big pan adapter. But anyway, I think you could fit the three Elecraft components in a box that's about the size that I mentioned, because the amplifier is 5 inches wide and the PX3 is 6 inches wide. So if you put those next to each other with some air, you're looking at about 12 to 13 inches. So I would put the amplifier and the pan adapter on the upper shelf and put the radio on the lower shelf, maybe with some other gadget. Or maybe I put the amp on the lower shelf. I'm not sure. The radio is 7 inches wide. So even if you put the radio and the amp next to each other, you're looking at about 15 inches. So that's why I say that if the interior dimension is 14, maybe 15 inches, you're good. And the max depth that you need is the amplifier. That's 10 inches deep. Plus you need some space for cabling. So call it 12. So, 12 inches deep, 15 inches wide, and then about a foot tall. I think you can fit it all in very nicely with room for, a decent speaker and a few other little gadgets. So what I'm thinking here is make two side panels, which are essentially just the right geometry that I just mentioned, and then dado cut some slots in it, maybe at about the midpoint and maybe up or down an inch or so for various different radios, and then cut some ply that just slides in like a shelf unit there, and just tack it in with some screws or brads or whatever's convenient. And then we have to come up with some sort of front and back panel. So that's kind of what I'm thinking for next year.
Well, that's cool. I mean, the 7300 makes a great standalone rig. I mean, the tuner in it, I believe, is only 3-1 versus the KX3 will tune a wet noodle of like
wet and dry,
infinite wet and dry in series or parallel. I mean, it's infinite to one. It tunes everything. The screen is bigger in touchscreen on the 7300. The radio is very intuitive to use. One of the bigger differences, though, is that the KX3 PX3 combo, with the backlight turned down on the PX3 and the backlight turned off on the KX3, I was down maybe like 600 milliamps. Yeah, which is sipping. Yeah. Whereas now, to their credit, ICOM on the 7300 on receive only is only drawing 0.9 amps, which compared to the 991 is amazing, since the 991 on receive draws almost 2 amps.
Well, I can tell you right now, I just turned the 991 on just in receive. It's a good 1.6 amps.
Yeah, and that's I'm guessing you don't have the volume on, or it may be squelched.
Nope, with no audio coming out.
Yeah.
And even if you turn the backlighting on the KXs, you're looking at another 100 mils. I mean,
yeah,
it's not.
I mean, on the PX3 on Max, it's a little bit more, but on the KX3, it's less than 100 mils. Yeah. Yeah.
So the 7300, by the way, has a odd antenna tuner mode. I don't know if you're familiar with this. But
no.
At a full 100 watts, it's a normal tuner like you just described, a 3-1 SWR max. So roughly a tuning range of about 25 ohms to 150 ohms. There is a mode in there, and I've never used one, so I don't really know except what I read. But there is a like emergency mode where if you fold the output power back to less than half of the rated output, so 50 watts or less, maybe it's 25 watts, I'm not sure, but let's say 50, then the tuner will give you a wider tuning range.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's not that it just does it. I mean, there's like a mode you have to turn on, I think, in the menu system to enable this. But I think it's called like emergency antenna tuner mode. So if that opens up the tuning range fairly wide, like the Elecraft tuner will tune, gosh, it's probably good to
easily
800 or 1,000 ohms. I mean, it's quite a range.
Yeah, like 25 to 1.
Yeah, it's a good 20 to 1. So I don't know what the ICOM is in this emergency mode, but
that's
according
to this, it's 10 to 1.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, I'll include a link to this website. I don't know if it explains. It basically says get wider range at the sacrifice of power, and you're right. It's called emergency mode.
So I'm thinking here. Well, if you were starting from scratch and money was not a major object, what would you pick as your perfect field day radio? Would it be the Elecraft? I think that's a great choice. I think the 7300 is a great choice. The 991 is a decent radio, but I don't think it'd be my top pick because the power consumption's high and the pan adapter is really tiny.
If you want all mode, all band, sure, but
yeah, that would be the reason to go with the 991 because it's got 2 and 440. So if you want to run VHF, the others don't. So that would be a good choice for VHF. Good point.
So I've been asked a lot over the last, since Dayton last year, what do I spend my money on? And honestly, the two radios that come up the most often are the KX3 and the 7300. And what I normally tell people is if you don't think you're going to really be operating portable, the KX3, I mean, with the KX3, you are paying for compact technology that is flawless. Like you're paying for the miniaturized experience. If you're not constantly operating, going to be portable, think you never will, then I don't think you have to stress over that situation. However, if you do plan on going to the field with it, or you do plan on taking it to field day, it is a portable radio first and foremost, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the 7300 is a rugged-ish, knock around standard 100-watt HF radio that can operate portable, but I mean it's best at home in the shack, right? Mm-hmm. So I think so. Either one is great. But that's just looking at new radios. I mean, those are my two personal favorite HF radios.
By the way, I would throw a couple of other comparison points between those two. The display, I like the display on the Elecraft pan adapters. But the 7300's display is gorgeous. I mean, that is, and you have the interactivity to be able to poke at signals and, switch frequency and such.
But you do on the PX3, just not by touching it.
Well, right, not by touching it. The thing that the Elecraft has going for it, besides the power consumption, I think is it wouldn't surprise me if the front end overload characteristics are better on the KX3. And I don't know that, but it would be interesting to take a look. So, at our field day, we did have some problems with some of the transmitters getting into some of the receivers. We have bandpass filters that completely solved the problem in one case and did not solve it in another case. And I wish we could have compared different radios to see if any of the radios would have not had that overload problem.
What radio was having the overload problem?
The 7100. We're getting a little bit of overload from one of the transmitters, and I don't know what the other radio was. There was at the other end of field day a 7200, a 7300, and an FT, whatever the little not the 891. The 891, right? So those three radios were in operation, but I don't know which one was experiencing the problem. Now, in all fairness, this is never a problem you're going to have at home. It's only a problem you're going to have when you have antennas very closely spaced and you're on the same or close bands.
I want to shout out for the KX3 because at the beginning of the contest, the beam we had was pointed perpendicularly across the 40-meter dipole that I was using to get on 15. I heard our other stations, but it's not like the 7300 where I would be getting a warning. The radio would be shutting itself off. I mean, literally, there's a warning that's like, the front end's getting a little overloaded. You would hear the signals highly superimposed over what you're actually trying to receive. The noise would be way up, etc. And I don't, like on the KX3, it just was like, yeah, there's another station there. You're going to hear it, but it's okay. We'll be fine.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, I've heard anecdotally that guys who have been doing de-expeditions with the KX3s have had pretty good results with them. I know for a fact that's one of the reasons why a lot of de-expeditions take the K3s, because they have really superb front ends that minimize that kind of interference problem. Probably one of the best radios going that does that. So, I think this is a kind of a question that sometimes people ask. Well, why should I spend $3,000 on a radio when I could buy the same feature set for $900? And this is kind of a reason. And maybe if you're operating at home and you never are in close proximity to another transmitter, then maybe you never appreciate the difference. But if you had a field day with a bunch of $800 HF radios versus a whole bunch of K3s. Now, of course, we're talking maybe $8,000 there. It would just be a better performing installation. So, sometimes you have to optimize around your budget, and sometimes around performance. You get to to really kind of go for it.
Well, and I'll remind people, even though Elecraft is a sponsor, you and I were both very proud Elecraft owners long before that happened.
Oh yeah. I'm going to be honest. I really wish I had your KX2 for field day. Yeah, I didn't operate the KX2. And one of the other guys brought a KX2 and played around a bit with it. I think it would have done okay. I don't think it's got nearly the filtering that even the KX3 has, though. So I think in a field day situation, everybody running QRP, it's probably fine. But if it were around a bunch of high power transmitters, probably not that great. Much as I love it. So the funny thing is, I don't really use my KX3 very much at all, because I got it originally for portability, but once the 2 came out, it's so much smaller even than the KX3 that I only use the KX2 portable. So the poor KX3 is sitting in a box, and that's why I'm trying to figure out how I could
put it
breathe some more life
a useful box.
Yeah, exactly. And I know some of you listening to this are thinking, you jerk. Send it to me.
I would say you could throw it in the trash can like Stuart did.
Yeah, that's right. Well, anyway, so any other learnings from your field day?
I mean, there's some practical, tactical kind of like logistics around food and people. One thing that we were in a brand new physical spot, and the solar panels had to be in one particular corner so that I can move them to follow the sun. We set up operating positions back to back, which last year we were all side by side. I personally prefer the side by side versus back to back. That's about it. It was amazingly fun. Hopefully, I worked at least a couple of you in that 350 contacts.
We learned that we need a shorter call sign because this year we used the club. We have 2 club calls, and the club call we used is WW6BAY. That's a lot of syllables.
What's that on CW? What's it sound like?
It takes about an hour to send it.
Okay, and that's at 50 words a minute?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
It's just ridiculous. So we used it because that's what people knew. But our other club call sign is K6SRA, which is a lot shorter in CW, and even on voice. By the way, I do recall one thing that was built for field day that I should have mentioned earlier.
What's that?
One of the antennas that was brought by John, KJ6K, and he built a cobweb. And I don't know if you ever heard of a cobweb antenna.
I have.
They're actually become rather popular. And if you've never seen one, the cobweb basically is a multi-band fan dipole that is constructed with wire and fiberglass spreaders. And you think about a fan dipole as having the elements stacked vertically on top of each other. Imagine that flipped horizontally so that the fan fans out horizontally, but then bend it into a square. So I know this, you probably have no idea what this sounds like if you're listening to this description, but if you just search for cobweb antenna, the performance of the cobweb is about the same as a dipole. It's a multi-band dipole. Works surprisingly well. And you can build them. I think someone actually makes them commercially too now. If you have any interest at all in the cobweb antenna, I want to point you to one fellow's website in particular who has done a really great job of redesigning the matching unit in the cobweb. And this is the website of Golf 3 Tango X-Ray Quebec, G3TXQ. And his website is www.karinya.net. Kilo Alpha Romeo India November Yankee Alpha.net. Anyway, go there and check out his webpage. He's got some fantastic resources on that webpage of designs he's done on other topics as well. But anyway, the cobweb's a really cool antenna. If you're looking for an HF 10 through 20 meter 5-band horizontally polarized no gain antenna, and you can't put up a dipole because you can't erect something high on both ends, this could be a great answer. So the whole thing mounts into a single mast and works pretty well. So have you ever used one, Jeremy?
I have not.
Well, works like a dipole, the single support. So check it out. It's a weird antenna. I'd never heard of them until about 2 or 3 years ago, and I showed it to John, and he said, "Oh, that's awesome! I'm going to make one." The next thing you know, he built it. So yeah, they're very interesting.
Nice.
So that's it for me for Field Day.
Well, likewise. So I think we should wrap things up.
Sounds good. Hey, I want to mention before we wrap, there are a whole bunch of topics coming down the pipe here on the show I wanted to mention to the listeners. And you had mentioned the BitX build project, and to encourage people to go get their BitX kit. We're working on getting Asher Farhan, the inventor, designer, evangelist for the BitX 40. We're going to try to get him on the show here. So he's agreed to do it. We just need to find a convenient time to hook up between the U.S. and India so we can actually have that conversation. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think we'll learn a lot from Farhan. He's a great guy and very kind to carve out the time. We have another interesting topic coming up. Brian, W6BY, who was at Baycon, did a presentation on microwave radio, and so I invited him to come on the show, and so we'll do an episode on building your own microwave rigs, and how do you even do that, and why would you want to, and do people actually do that sort of crazy things? And there's actually a huge bunch of people who build microwave radios and do a lot of contesting, so that's pretty cool. Also, we've got an interview coming up with the fellows from PowerFilm Solar. So the guys who made your solar panel. So we're going to get them on the show, talk a bit about their solar panels. And I think I'm going to wind up with one of their solar panels, and I want to do a review on it. And I know you've been using their panels for quite some time, so we'll have to collaborate on that.
Yep, I actually, when I got it several years ago, I actually did a review of it versus the Goal Zero 30-watt Boulder aluminum glass panel.
Yes, I remember that video. Actually, that was excellent video. So I assume that the panels probably perform now just as they did then, but I do want to do some measurements and I'm thinking about actually putting a panel out on the ground and hooking up a microcontroller. We have to get an Arduino into this conversation somehow.
Well, of course.
So what I'm thinking is take a little microcontroller and an A to D converter on it, and have it look at the voltage off the panel over the course of the day to see. Of course, it varies over the years and the weather and all that. But I'm curious to see what kind of voltage you see.
You will see a pretty constant 20 volts open circuit. You really
I need to put a load on it.
You need to load the panel, yeah.
Yeah. The other topic that I want to do is to talk about some of these really small PC interfaced pieces of test equipment. So we haven't had a show on test equipment for a long time, and I'm thinking that that might be fun. So there's a whole bunch of topics coming up, and I think you were working on one too for test equipment as well, right?
Yep, we are trying to get Jason from Siglent to come on to introduce us to professional spectrum analyzers.
That would be great. Hey, we should get the guys from Rygal on here and let them just duke it out.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, fun in quotes.
Thank you very much. We hope your field days were as fun as ours. If you want to get in touch with me and George, you can reach us via email by sending it to workbench@hamradio360.com. That's workbench@hamradio360.com. Until then, I am your host, Jeremy KF7IJZ. You can follow me online on Twitter @KF7IJZ. I also have a YouTube channel you can find by searching for my call sign KF7IJZ.
And I'm George on Twitter @KJ6VU or email direct george@hamradio360.com.
Next week, we will be back with another episode of Ham Radio 360, which follows opposite the weeks of ours. We hope everybody had a great and safe and productive field day. Thanks so much for listening. 73.
73 is all.
I'll be quiet until I'm called upon.
You shall only speak when spoken to.
Yes, sir.
So today we have a special. All right, are we recording there,
Yeah.
Master Cylinder?
Yeah, by the way, you're a little overdriven.
I'm always overdriven. I'm on. Okay,
Thanks,
All right,
dude.
I almost hung up. I was like, oh, wait.
I hope you're pressing the record button there, man.
Yeah.
Because we don't record this stuff.
I didn't record anything. I thought we were just chatting.
I thought you said
damn.
he was recording.
I thought he was.
No, it was your turn to record. All right, well, I'll start over. So, hey, everybody, this is the Ham Radio 360 podcast. My name is Jason, K6DGN. I wanted to welcome you here tonight. I have George, Z, and I have Jeremy, and Kilo Foxtrot 7 India Juliet Z, Zulu.
I think you have a future in podcasting.
You can have my job. You're at your
They're
height.
letting anybody do it. They're letting anybody do it these days.
They
though,
really
so,
are.
Yeah.
Can you say it with kind of a South Carolinian accent?
I don't want to offend Jeremy.
I'm not from South Carolina, so you go right ahead.